Thanks to Eddie, CPS. Thank you, Irrigator Tech, City of Santa Ana, for giving us an opportunity to come in here and speak to you about some of the things that we do at Dow AgriSciences. As you know, Jessica just spoke to you this morning about insect control, insect identification, and believe it or not, those do coincide with weed control as well. As Jessica indicated, a lot of those insects that you'll see, like aphids and things like that, are often found on weeds as well. And so what I want to talk to you today about is managing weeds in the urban setting. As we roll into the fall season, and we all have our fingers crossed that we might get some rain this winter, generally that rain will also bring weeds in your landscapes. And so Eddie's asked me to talk to you a little bit about managing weeds in the urban setting and how it will, and some things to be watching out for as we roll into that winter season. Okay, so with that, I'll get started. Just a little bit about myself. I went to Oklahoma State, got my degree in agriculture economics. So like Jess, I'm not from around here. I'm from Oklahoma. And, but I did get my master's degree at Cal Poly Pomona in landscape architecture. So I went from Oklahoma in ag econ to landscape architecture. And just on a side note, I'm also a Army reservist for a unit in Upland, California. As you can see, my territory covers all of generally Southern California except Imperial County, which is a very interesting territory, to be honest, because this territory encompasses everything from alpine conditions all the way to desert climates, to coastal climates, and super diverse portions of woodlands and things like that. So it's a very, very interesting territory, but with that also comes with some very interesting challenges, both in landscape, veg management, and things like that. The markets I do cover, because of the diversity, is going to basically be everything out here that has weeds and growing plants. So I cover turf and ornamental. So if you're managing golf courses, of course your lawns, nurseries, ornamentals, as well as I know many of you here that are with municipalities, oftentimes will have to deal with roadside settings or perimeter areas that might be what you might call an industrial site. And our company and myself, we also provide products and services for that particular market as well. All right. We have a whole host of tools at Dow AgriSciences. Everything that you can see, all the herbicides that we have in green on the turf and ornamental side. We have fungicides to help control diseases in your landscape, pictured in red. And then in blue, as Jess had indicated, we have Conserve for insecticides, and also Dursban in the ornamental market. And that's just the turf and ornamental side. This is the tools that we have available on the veg management side. So again, for those of you that might be dealing with industrial sites, you can see the whole host of solutions that we have for you. The reason why I show that to you is, bottom line, if you have a problem with weeds, insects, or diseases, at Dow AgriSciences, we will likely have a solution for you and ask that you give us an opportunity to help serve your needs. All right. We also have quite an extensive, team in the western states to try to support your efforts. As I indicated, I have Southern California, Jessica and I have been working closely together to help do the training and support needs. But I also want to introduce one of my colleagues as well. Lisa, would you mind saying it? Elisa Trejo is our sales rep in the Pacific Northwest. So as you can see, she came all the way up from Washington State to be with us and help us out here on some of the demonstrations that we're going to be doing outside. But we have a pretty extensive footprint as sales reps, and then we also have some of our management folks, James Rowley out of Tucson. Dr. Brian Brett is a full-time individual that we have in Sacramento that helps with regulatory issues, to help us register products, deal with re-registration of our current products so that you can continue to have the tools available to you to solve your problems. Dr. Brian Stewart is our public affairs, and that individual is there to help with legislative issues. Maybe there might be some legislation to prevent you from doing something, or maybe it's like a red-legged frog issue, environmental issues. We have individuals here to help support your efforts or our efforts as an industry so that we can continue having the tools available. And then finally, Vanell Peterson is our field scientist. She's out of Colorado. But Vanell is a very notable person, especially when it comes to weed science, serving as past president for the Weed Science Society of America and other notable boards in the industry. So we have a really strong team, and I hope that you feel confident in being able to call on us to help solve some of your problems. All right, so the reason why we're here is to talk a little bit about weed control and landscapes. So let me give you just a quick overview. We recognize that the landscapes that you're dealing with, especially in Southern California, can be varied. Can be a mix of annual, perennials, trees, and shrubs. The terrain can be flat, it can be varied, like in this situation. Oftentimes you're dealing with expansive areas, such as maybe this hillside with a mix of ground covers that are a variety of different species. Maybe you're dealing with an area, and as we know as landscape maintenance individuals, we know that landscape can have a significant influence into how people perceive that neighborhood or that space. And so what we do as professionals is very important to basically our communities. And then we also know that dealing with all these landscapes, that managing them or a specific area can be very, very time consuming. Now, I know labor is very limited and so time is of the essence, but we also know that safety is of the essence. And we're dealing with these sloped areas where several crew hours is needed to probably hand weed that, or every time or every minute that you're out there by a roadside setting, your folks are in jeopardy of possibly being hit by a stray car or something like that. So it's important that what we do in terms of managing weeds along these types of landscapes, we do it as quickly and efficiently as possible to minimize the risk to the individuals out there. All right, so with that, the tools that we have available to us to help increase our efficiency and effectively control weeds, one of them, of course, is herbicides. And arguably, it's probably one of the most effective, cost-effective tools that we have as far as landscape maintenance is concerned. So first thing I want to go over is, are herbicides cost-effective? So I want to share with you just kind of how we might think through that to determine whether, first of all, herbicides are cost-effective. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about herbicide application timing, comparing the differences between pre and post-emerge, especially as we roll into that rainy season where we might want to take advantage of those rains for pre-emerge control. I want to share with you a few ideas on herbicide pre-emerge solutions, and then herbicide post-emerge control solutions as we also roll into later in the season. And then finally, just some fundamentals I'd like for you to consider to improve your overall weed control. Okay. So that's kind of the roadmap or the agenda that I'd like to cover with you today. All right, so here's my question to you. Here's a gallon of herbicide at $250 a gallon. Raise your hand if you think that's cost effective. Eddie does. Elisa, Lauren, Marco, anybody else? All right, so we got probably half the room. The other half, you don't think it's cost effective for $250.
What pay rate?
There's a thinking man right there. I like that. We don't know the answer to that. So those of you raise your hand, we don't know the answer to really answer it effectively. We need more information. We need to know what is the cost per unit of measure, okay? So in this case, we know the unit of measure is this container right here. It's $250. We also need to know what is the product use rate, right? If $250 will cover 10 feet, that's pretty darn expensive, right? So we need to know the product use rate. We need to know the size of the area to be treated as well, okay? And then finally, we need to know the real cost of your standard method. So when you call Eddie up and say, hey, Eddie, I need a herbicide, and he says, oh yeah, it's gonna cost you $250. You're like, what? That's, just remember, you need to know all these facts before you really can make an informed opinion as to whether it's gonna be effective for you or not. All right, so let's walk through this. $250 for the gallon. The rate is 1 quart per acre. we're going to treat a full acre, and currently we hand weed. All right? So we're going to compare it to the cost of hand weeding. And I know many of us will use that to either avoid using herbicides, or we maybe consider herbicides too expensive for our weed control program. So let's compare that. Does anybody know where this is? Does this look familiar? Yeah. This is basically where we are today. And this is the parking lot. Probably many of you parked here. But this is about an acre. Okay? That square is probably a little less, but it's fairly close to about an acre. So for those of you that are used to in dealing with landscape maintenance, oftentimes we're thinking about 1,000 square feet. We know our labels often say 1 acre, you know, this is a rate per acre, but what is that really? So we're going to go outside and actually visualize that so you can clearly see what an acre is going to look like. So, is it going to be cost effective to treat an acre? Let's walk through that. Now, an acre is basically 208 feet in length and 208 feet in width. Okay, so that's about 43,000 some square feet. So let's take $250 a gallon divided by 128 ounces. That's how many ounces are in a gallon, right? That's going to give you $1.95 per ounce. So every ounce, every shot glass full of that herbicide is only going to cost you $1.95. Now, $1.95 per ounce, and you need 32 of those shot glasses or 32 ounces to treat that entire parking lot area, right? So that's $62.50 of just material to treat that acre. But do you usually call Eddie up and say, hey, I need to treat an acre? Or in most cases, many of you are treating 1,000 square feet, 2,000 or 3,000 square feet, right? So let's break it down a little bit further. What does it really cost for just, let's look at 1,000 square feet. Because for residential, oftentimes for residential turf grass, for instance, in Southern California, that may be the average space that you might be treating. Or it's an easy space to kind of calculate as you're doing some maybe turf grass areas in a commercial property, for instance. So let's look at it for 1,000 square feet. So you can, I put some tree in here, a 30-foot tree, a 20-foot tree, and a car and some guy on his cell phone there. So you can have a little bit of perspective as to how big that space might be. But 1,000 square feet, maybe 50 feet by 20, or it might be simply a 10 by 100 square feet. Maybe it's along the sidewalk or roadside. And so that breaks down to $1.43 herbicide for that area. So $1.43. You have to ask yourselves, is $1.43 going to be cost effective for me as far as my weed control? Let's look at it in terms of hand weeding that area. So you take the hours of labor times the number of times you have to hand weed that area. Because again, when you hand weed, there's no residual control. It's effective because you remove that plant, but it's nothing stopping the next seed from emerging in that same space. So there's no residual. So you do have to go back year, or time after time, within a year to hand weed. Then let's multiply the cost per hour, and that'll be your cost of your alternate weed control. So we did that math. Let's say it took us half an hour to hand weed this section, and maybe go back there 4 to 5 times a year. So that's about 2.5 hours, and we're going to pay this guy $10 an hour to do that. That's about $25 of labor a year to hand weed that. Whereas just the cost of material is going to be $1.43. So let's say it takes a guy to go to the job site and spray the material in an hour. So you're still at $10 or $11.43. So at $11.43, would that herbicide be cost effective for weed control versus hand weeding? Yeah, yeah. So what I want to do is encourage you to use the tools available to you to make your job easier, to make yourself more efficient, and ultimately make yourself more money. All right. Now, on a side note, if you want to play around with the numbers, AgroSciences has this tool. It's called the hand weeding calculator, but it's basically sliders that you can take. And you can slide this over if you want 1 hour, Slide it over if you want the average cost to be, maybe you're paying somebody 15 bucks an hour, maybe you're gonna do 10 acres. You can do all these calculations. The cost of snapshot or whatever herbicide you wanna use, and then the actual granular rate, whether it's 100 or 150 pounds per acre, and then the length of residual control. It'll calculate for you on an annual basis your cost of hand weeding, and then your total cost of using a herbicide, and then ultimately your total savings per year by using a herbicide application. You can find this at dowprovesit.com, or at, you can also get through different sites of dowagro.com as well. It'll help you get there. But I encourage you to use that. I'll have this available if you want to kind of play around with it on the back table as well.
Is there an app, Jim, or is it on the website?
Is there an app? Currently, we don't have one to use on your smartphone, but I believe, yeah, you should be able to just go on your. You can access it on your smartphone and use the slider. Because I know I use this tool on my iPad, so it shouldn't be any reason why I can't do it on a smartphone as well.
You know, you can get to it through our app, the TNO app that's on there.
That's right. That's right. And I'll show you how to get on the TNO app here in a little bit as well. Thanks, Jesse. So I encourage you to check this out. It'll help you to run some numbers as well for your area. All right. So now I want to get into the timing of herbicide application. I talked about we're coming up on, fingers crossed, some rainy season. And I couldn't find really any pictures in my bank of photos throughout the year of it raining. So the best I could come up with for this 2014 was some puddles that I took. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about getting ready for the rainy season. Now, this graph on the, that you see here is inches of precipitation as a rainfall average for Southern California. And then on the bottom axis is time, so you see the different months. And the source here is the, I'm gonna see if I can get this right, maybe you guys can help me. National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, is that right? NOAA? So we got this from that website for the average rainfall in Southern California. And generally, we should be expecting some rain coming October, November. And you can see we have most of our rainfall just at the beginning of the year, January through March. Now, what does that mean in terms of how weeds grow? Has anybody heard the term summer annuals and winter annuals? Yeah. So it's going to, our climate is going to also influence how weeds grow. The life cycle of weeds, generally for annuals, is going to be a summer annual or a winter annual. If you're not familiar with those two terms, basically what we're looking at as a winter annual, here we are at the beginning of fall. Once we hit those rains, those weeds will begin to germinate from seed that had been laying there all summer, will begin to mature in winter after January, February, when you have all these rains, and then spring, it will complete its life cycle, mature, drop its seed, and the cycle continues. So the winter annuals are probably the ones that we want to be most concerned with right now, because we're here and those are the guys that are going to start to germinate. Now, as we roll into the spring season, the summer annuals are the ones we want to be more concerned with, or at least have a plan ready for them. Because in the winter, those lay around as seed, and in the spring period, when things warm up and we still have adequate moisture, those will start to germinate and become problematic for you throughout the summer. All right, quiz. What can you name, as you're driving down the road, maybe it's on your way over here today, can you name for me a summer annual that you might have seen on the way here or driving around the road for the last couple of days? Crabgrass is a summer annual, right? You bet. So it'll start to emerge in the spring and then also mature out in the fall. So if you have crabgrass in your yard, would you want to treat it right now? Probably not, because it's going to die anyway, right? Anybody seen tumbleweeds? Yeah. You can see a lot of those greening up, right? Really big and green right now, because we're in this period and they're about to dry out and be ready for those Santa Ana winds that pick them up and move them, allow them to spread their seed. Mare's tail is another one you see a lot alongside the road. That's going to fall under this. Okay? How about, what do you see along the road in the wintertime? Or sorry, spring and wintertime. Maybe that's bright, has yellow flowers.
Dandelion.
Mustard, yeah. Dandelion's a perennial, but mustard is an annual. So mustard will start to emerge this fall, and in the winter period or in the spring, you'll see them bright yellow and all along the roadside. They'll die off in the spring, and now you'll see, basically you see it now, you see all the dead carcasses of mustard, and then they become a fire hazard for us in the wildland areas. So that's kind of how those plants will kind of play out through our Southern California market. Does that make sense? All right. So what does that mean for us? So winter annuals will emerge, and you can see that the winter annuals follow that precipitation curve. That summer annuals will begin when there's still precipitation in the ground, and generally will tend to be fairly independent of moisture. I mean, they do require some, but there's enough in Southern California, whether through the humidity or the dew, that allows them to still survive. Like your tumbleweeds, for instance. They really thrive on that dry weather. So that's kind of how it works out for us. So now when you're trying to plan your weed control program, you'll want to consider those conditions as you develop that particular plan. So your fall pre-emerge is a really good time to be ready for that. You start thinking about your spring post-emerge during that period, because now you're trying to take advantage of your summer annuals emergence. And then finally, for those of you that might be dealing with woody species, maybe it's Mexican fan palm, maybe it is tree of heaven or castor bean or things like that, that's a really good time to start picking up your perennials and your woody brush species. Okay. So maybe that'll help you to categorize when's a good time, when's the optimum period, and to help you to start scheduling. Rather than looking at this gigantic elephant, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So here's an example of trying to break it down. Right? Okay, so let's take a look at the different treatments. Now, as we're getting ready for the winter period, what is it that we probably want to try to look at? Pre or post? Yeah, pre-emerge. So for those of you who aren't familiar, pre-emerge basically is just applying the product, herbicide product, onto the soil profile, whereas obviously post-emerge is after the plants have already emerged, the weed species have already emerged. And what generally happens in the soils as a pre-emerge is that you make your application on the soil surface, but your weed seed is down below that. So we actually need to get your herbicide product down around the weed seed. And you do that through two ways. It could be general precipitation, or it could be mechanical incorporation. But generally in Southern California, we'll just deal with incorporation. And that's why this period, right before rains, is a good time to start your pre-emerge programs. Once that active ingredient or the chemical moves to the soil profile with the water solubility, the weed seeds will emerge. It'll send up a shoot and a root. They'll absorb the chemical and die before ever coming out of the ground. Okay. So that's why it's important, if you read pre-emerge labels, it'll say must be watered in or incorporated within 21 days, or 3 days, or whatever it is, that's on that pre-emerge label. One thing to know about pre-emerge is that this is a period of when your germinating weed is the most susceptible. Because now you're just dealing with a tiny, tiny little organism. It's just a seed, as opposed to trying to spray a large plant that's already come up. It doesn't take very much active ingredient to control that tiny seed. And also, by controlling weeds pre-emerge, you never have to worry about those desirable plants competing with your weeds. So your weeds never rob your desirables of some of the nutrients, the moisture, and light and space. Also, by controlling it pre-emerge, these weeds, like the spurge, never has an opportunity to produce seed, which is going to be problematic for years to come. Generally, pre-emerge products give you soil activity, whereas some post-emerge products generally is just going to be post-emerge control on the foliar and doesn't really give you soil residual. So you'll have to look at the products you use to determine whether you get soil residual as opposed to emerge. All right, and then also finally, pre-emerge can be fairly selective. So in other words, you can control broadleaf weeds and say leave your grassy species like your turf grass, or vice versa. So you can kind of manipulate what you want to kill and what you don't want to kill with pre-emerge. And sometimes there's post-emerge products that'll just kind of wipe out whatever you got standing up. Some other things to consider, you do need though to make sure that you do broadcast applications with pre-emerge control. If you're planning a pre-emerge program, it really doesn't make sense to use it as spot treatment because you really just don't know where those weeds are going to emerge. So you do need to consider a broadcast application. If the weeds are emerged, it's important to possibly consider a tank mix, as something that will actually get those weeds that are already up. Because remember, pre-emerge generally won't control the established plants. So you'll need to add something in there post-emerge. If you have a perennial weed, like a dandelion, or say you like a bindweed, or something like that that comes back year after year after year from the same rootstock, post-emerge is going to be very important to consider. Bermuda grass is an example. Bermuda grass in your turf is great, that's what you want. But if it's in your ornamental planter bed, that's where it becomes a weed. So you'll want to consider a post-emerge treatment in that situation. And then finally, again, irrigating or incorporating in the soil is one of the most important things probably for a pre-emerge product, just to make sure it gets down there where it needs to work around that weeds. All right. Any questions about some of the fundamentals of herbicide applications? All right, so let me share with you some pre-emerge options to consider. Has anybody ever used Dimension before? Okay, cool, thank you for your business. Dimension is a pre-emerge herbicide. It's a very, very effective pre-emerge herbicide. It's got a very versatile label. You can use it on turf grass, and you can also use it in the landscape. It controls both grasses and broadleaf weeds. As I mentioned, it's very versatile where you can use it, and there's different formulations available. If you like granular, if you like liquid, this particular product basically is available in most of the formulations that are available. And finally, it does not stain. So if you've ever run into this situation where you've sprayed a product out and it stained your shoes or the sidewalk, or maybe it's a homeowner's tile surface, for instance, you can avoid that by using products or using Dimension because it's colorless, and so it won't stain your equipment as well. These are the different formulations. I said a liquid, water-soluble packet, and also a granular formulation. You can see the rates are fairly small, a quarter of a pound of active ingredient, all the way up to half a pound of active ingredient per acre. I like the quart rate. That's just the rate that I think works best in Southern California. And you can see, so you're using less active ingredient in there.
What's the benefit of that going higher rate?
Is there a benefit?
Or Dimension?
Yeah, so the question is what is the benefit of using a higher rate with Dimension? Generally with pre-emerge products, Eddie, the higher rate is going to give you longer residual control. Also, certain weed species are going to be more difficult to control, and therefore a higher rate will assure more efficacy in that situation. These are the particular weeds that I find important here in Southern California that are on our label. POA, crabgrass, spurge. It also picks up mustards, and you can see some of the other grasses that it will also control. Now these are from seed, so if you have kikuyu grass already established, it's not going to hurt your kikuyu grass. But if you're trying to keep kikuyu grass seed from emerging, say in your planter bed, this is effective for that as well.
How many people can have a problem with Dallas and Goose? Gotta go with that.
Okay, so Dallas and goosegrass, right? Now goosegrass, again, it'll prevent it from emerging as seed. It is an annual. Dallas grass, again, is a seedling, but Dallas is a perennial. So if you already have a Dallas grass problem, Dimension is probably not the product you want to use specifically for that. Possibly Aaliyah might have some solutions for you on that. I think, does Miss pick up?
Suppression.
Okay, give some suppression. So possibly dismiss, give some suppression of Dallas grass might be something to consider. Yes, Marco?
I see grounds up there or all one?
Malva and groundsel. No, I don't think it's on the label. There's probably another pre-emergent I'll share with you that's going to be more effective for Malva and groundsel. And that product, thank you, Marco, is Gallery Herbicide. Appreciate the transition there. So let me share with you some Gallery Herbicide is a really good solution for some of those problematic weeds, broadleaf weeds, like Marco had indicated. Now, why would I consider Gallery? Now, Gallery, as you can see, in this particular chart, on the left side is a number of ornamental plants that are listed on its label to be tolerant to a herbicide. And then you can see across here are the different herbicides that we've done a label comparison on. And as you can see, Gallery has over 714 ornamental plants on its label. So what that means is you can be assured that, and most likely when you apply it into your landscape or on your turf grass, it's not going to hurt your desirable plant. And reality is, landscape maintenance, you're in the business of trying to encourage a healthy environment to have a healthy landscape. And if you use a herbicide that possibly damages or slows down the plants that you're trying to take care of, you're really kind of putting yourself behind. So with Gallery, his claim to fame is that it's very, very safe to ornamental plants. So here's an example. This is just some common plants that we find in the Southern California market. Lantana, New Gold, for instance. You can see Gallery, very safe to it, whereas a competitive product would actually damage its blooms. Now, what we do at Dow Science is what we consider probably one of the most rigorous protocols in the industry to be assured that when we put a product or a plant, an ornamental plant on the label, you can be assured that it's going to be safe. Because what we do is we take 2x, the highest labeled rate, and we apply that on a set of plants. Like in this case, it's Lantana. And then 30 days later, we'll apply the same 2x rate onto that same plant. So within 30 days, that plant has 4 times the highest labeled rate. So we do that 2 years in a row, 2 places across the country. And then we rate those results. 0 being basically untreated, 10 being dead, a dead plant. If you get some response from 0 to 3, then we consider that for the label. Anything beyond 4 and up, we won't even consider it. So again, keep in mind, that plant has had 4x its labeled rate. Here's another common one that we have in the Southern California landscape, daylily. And one thing that we've also, my colleague before me here had been here 35 years. He always said, customers will forgive you for possibly some spotty weed control, but they won't forgive you if you kill their plants. So that's something that I've always kind of considered when we talk about herbicide recommendations. We want to be very careful on how that what we recommend is also going to be very safe to the plants you use. One more, this is ligustrum, and you can see that Gallery's quite safe to ligustrum as well. So we just talked about Gallery as a broadleaf herbicide as a pre-emerge. Before that, I talked about Dimension for grasses and broadleaves. If you bring those two together, you have a really nice tank mix in your landscape beds or on your turf grass to prevent weedy species, both grass and broadleaves, from being a problem in your treated area. And oftentimes, landscape maintenance companies will bring those two together to help solve some of their problems and minimize some of the need to go back and hand weed. We also have a new formulation. I did want to just announce the fact that although for those of you that use Gallery in the past, you might be familiar with it as a dry flowable. You would generally have to mix it in the tank with water first. Like this is a tank mix right now of a little bit of Dimension with Gallery DF, dry flowable. Then you slurry it, and then you pour it in your backpack. Well, if you don't thoroughly mix it, then you have this, okay? So it's important to pre-slurry a dry flowable to make sure you have a thorough, that the product has thoroughly dissolved before putting it into your backpack. Or you can consider using Gallery SC, which is our liquid formulation. Now we've done some trials on this throughout Southern California, and as far as efficacy is concerned, as far as plant safety is concerned, it's just as good as what you know about Gallery DF. What we do like about it is, of course, there's no slurry, no mechanical agitation, and it comes in a larger container size, so it'll minimize some of the disposal concerns that you might have as far as like triple rinsing and things like that. So it is labeled for over 660 ornamentals. Caltrans uses it right over some of their landscapes over the thousands of miles they have in Southern California. So here's a trial that we did in Diamond Bar. You can see there are some different mustard species here. We have some dandelions. I think we had some Russian thistle in here, tumbleweed, and just kind of a whole mess of stuff along the roadside. This is April 11th. So this was actually, this picture was taken 4 months after, and I was out there just last week, so we're 5 months after application, and it still looks just as clean. So we know that the product is very effective. It also has very good longevity, residual control for broadleaf species. We did combine this with Dimension, and we used our Accord XRT2, which is our glyphosate, to knock down these plants that you see up. So as a pre-emerge, that combination did very well, even 5 months after treatment. Okay. Any questions about Gallery SC and the new formulation? Yes, Eddie?
Said it come up and hang out before it gets watered in.
That's a good question. The question is, how long, and especially in this setting, can you make an application of Dimension and Gallery before it needs to be watered in? So on the label for Dimension, it says it needs to be activated with a ½ inch of water for it to be effective on weed control. It does not give you a time frame. Dimension just needs to be watered in, because Dimension is fairly stable on the soil surface. It's very minimal breakdown under UV light. Now, Gallery, on the other hand, on the label it says it needs to be watered in within 21 days. So it still gives you a fair amount of time once you make that application to be watered in. So for those of you that are managing more industrial settings where you don't have irrigation and you're more limited to natural precipitation, it does still give you a pretty wide window. Gallery is 21 days. Dimension just needs to be watered in. For those of you in the landscape setting, generally you'll have irrigation, so I think in most cases you'll be okay there. So as you look at your California landscape, this is where one of the things I'll suggest is certainly we can use it in a landscape setting along the roadsides. You have all these desirable plant species, but you don't want to be spending all that time hand weeding along the roadside. So consider Gallery Dimension right over the top, but also you might want to consider in sensitive site situations where adjacent may be a risk, maybe a liability risk. Maybe there's some herbaceous plants or someone's flowers along a fence line, and you need to spray that because that's the right-of-way that you manage, but you don't want to damage or hurt that neighbor's property. Gallery Dimension is a good combination because if it possibly drifts, we know that it's going to be very safe over a numerous list of ornamentals. So it really reduces your probability of getting a call and saying, hey, you damaged our plants, now we want compensation. So consider it as an opportunity or a tool to help reduce your risk in those particular situations. They did just that at Caltrans. So Dimension and Gallery, adjacent is a residential property. You can see the cypress trees here. They had some desirable vines growing on a Caltrans wall, sound wall, and they used that combination to reduce their risk. And you can see this is the treated area, and this is the untreated 4 months after application. You see it's still very clean. So again, use it as an opportunity to help reduce some of the problems that you might run into in the future, especially as it pertains to pesticide use. Now, if you're familiar with Gallery 75DF, and you use the 1 pound bottle per acre, this is the rate that you would use. So the 1 pound bottle is 75% active, so you would use 23 ounces should you decide to use the liquid formulation. Okay. It's available in quarts and also 2.5 gallons. So if you use larger volumes, a 2.5 gallon is apparently going to reduce your disposal, the container disposal issues. If you like a granular and you like Gallery, Snapshot is certainly something to consider, because Snapshot is a combination of Gallery with a grass and broadleaf herbicide, similar to Dimension, but it's a trifluralin, or we call it in the ag business treflan. So that combination is very, very good. It's very similar to your Gallery and Dimension combo, but strictly a granular. And we'll use a little bit of that today, and we do the demonstration outside. It is not labeled for turf grass, so don't think about putting this onto your turf. It's only for your ornamental beds. And you can see the rates here, 100 to 200 pounds per acre. For 1,000 square feet, you're using about 4.6 pounds. And it's going to be available in a 2.5 TG in a 50-pound bag. Or if you possibly have back problems or you want to avoid back problems, there's a 25-pound bag available to you as well in the DG formulation. And again, the claim to fame for this particular product is its plant safety. It has the similar qualities as the Gallery Dimension in the liquid, and as a Snapshot, it's going to be very, very safe to your ornamental plants. And as you can see here from the graph, it's right up there with Gallery alone in terms of the number of plants that it has on its label. And that's what it looks like in some of the key weeds: burr clover, black medic, which we oftentimes find in the turf grass; oxalis, which is going to really start to be a problem right now; plantains, you'll find that a lot in some, especially your compacted areas, maybe some of those areas where there's bare spots. Plantain loves to grow. Snapshot's effective on that. Spurge you'll find just about everywhere, and that product Snapshot is very, very effective on spurge. All right, any questions on the pre-merge? Yes, Mark?
How well does it work on puncture vine?
Very good question. How good does Snapshot work on puncture vine? Puncture vine, the short answer, not very well. Puncture vine is a larger seeded broadleaf weed, and it also tends to stay on the soil surface. Smaller weed seeds will tend to work their way down further in the soil profile, where pre-emerge products oftentimes do a better job. Large seeded broadleaf weeds oftentimes stay on top, and on top you get a lot of herbicide breakdown, and so they manage to survive sitting on top, especially puncture vine. So not very effective. Puncture vine, you probably want to consider, if you have that problem, a post-emerge treatment. Yes, sir?
In the gallery, it showed, or you said there was 95 weeds into control. What is the Snapshot list?
Yes, the number of weeds that Snapshot controls, don't quote me on this, but I think it's more.
I thought so too.
Yeah, I think it's the trifluralin, the other component in there, actually has a broader spectrum of weeds than the Dimension. And so therefore, I believe we're greater than 100 on that one. I want to say about 110.
Wasn't there a period of time, and this was quite a few years ago, when they first were introducing the gallery and things in California, and they tried to get Snapshot labeled for a combination of two chemicals labeled for turf?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that might have been before my time, but yeah, I'm not sure on that. Any other questions on pre-emerge? All right, let's switch to post-emerge. Now, the reason why I talk about post-emerge, if you have weeds that are already up, you certainly need to use the post-emerge to be able to control them, but as we roll into the spring season, you want to do some pre-planting. Does anybody know what this weed is? Poa annua. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about are probably some of the two most problematic weeds in turf grass. The first one is probably Poa annua. Now, if you're going to treat for Poa annua, it's probably too late, so I won't go into that very much. You'll probably want to treat this around August, no later than early September. Because if you wait till much later, it's already emerged and you're just not seeing it. So Poa annua is going to show, it's kind of this limey green color. It's really going to affect the color and consistency of that turf grass. It's generally considered kind of a weak turf grass, but it is very prolific in Southern California, and so it can be very problematic. Again, this is probably, if you've got a treat for it, you probably want to consider something post-emerge. Pre-emerge, though, you can consider snapshot, dimension. You can make a late summer, early fall application, and then make another application of one of those two products into the springtime. If you need to hit it post-emerge, you can use a product called Curb SC, which you only want to use that for Bermuda grass, but it will certainly control your POA. Was anybody here at the meeting that we had last year? Okay, just a few folks. Last year we actually did a demonstration. Eddie and I did a curb application on their softball fields and really cleaned up the POA problem. That was about 70% of the problem, or 70% of the turf grass on that field. And we really cleaned it up and allowed that Bermuda grass to thrive. Juan was very, where's Juan, is he? Yeah, Juan was very helpful in helping us to establish that, and was actually quite successful in removing POA. So if you're looking for a post-emerge, Curb is a really good choice. And I know there's other products out there that are going to be very effective for you as well. But key message, pre-emerge, too late, start thinking about post-emerge. All right. How about this one, crabgrass? Anybody have problems with this? Yeah. So that'd be what I'd say probably the second, not necessarily in that order, but second problematic weed in turf, because it affects the color, texture, density, and turf quality. It's an annual, so it's taking up the space that you're trying to grow that perennial. It dies in the fall season. Now you have this dead spot, a bare spot, where those winter annuals will come back. So you want to try to get rid of it. Now, just so you know, from a biological standpoint, this is when crabgrass begins to be a problem for you. So this is a map of us here in Southern California. And Penn State says when the upper inch of soil reaches 55 to 58 degrees at daybreak for 4 to 5 days, that's when you start to see crabgrass emerge. And this was taken on February 8th. That was a 2-week average. So even early in the season, February 8th, you can see over 2 weeks our soil temperatures in Southern California are already conducive to crabgrass germination. So it's important when you think about crabgrass control that you really start to think about controlling that pre-emerge early. Now, crabgrass grows in stages. The first stage is before what they call pre-tiller, and it's generally going to be about 5 leaves before it sends out another tiller. So if you see crabgrass out there, in most cases, your pre-emerge products are not going to work for you. Other herbicides will not work. Once that crabgrass is up, 2 to 8 weeks later, it will start to tiller, send out basically runners to grow and spread. But one thing I would want to mention is that dimension does actually control both pre-emerge as well as early post-emerge. But our recent research has found that we're also very, very effective on tillered crabgrass. In fact, upwards of what I've seen to be 5 tillered crabgrass, which is pretty amazing. Because here's a picture. This is 1 to 2 leaves, 3 to 5 tillers. So from very small all the way to very large. Everywhere that's dark is a dimension application at the 1 quart rate. So this is a replicated, randomized study, and you can see that throughout there, it's very, very effective on crabgrass. In fact, these products here are actual post-emerge products for crabgrass. The reason why they don't look so good is they just didn't have the residual control. So they killed the initial flush, but didn't have a residual to prevent additional plants from coming up. Whereas the dimension got both post-emerge control as well as prevented any of the weed seeds from emerging. So that's why it looks really, really good. So I wanted to take that study that was done in Fresno and actually replicate it down here in Southern California to validate whether we would see the similar thing. And you can see this is dimension on the left with the non-ionic surfactant activator 90, I believe it was. And you see where it's brown and some of the crabgrass starting to die out, whereas this is untreated. And you can see that even though this was mowed at the same time, how quickly the crabgrass gets up above your Bermuda grass. So if you pan out a little bit, you can see this untreated area, kind of a mohawk, and then where this is more of a darker green, and you can see some of the crabgrass starting to die out in those treated sections. This is on crabgrass, as you can see, from this size, upwards of 5-tiller stage. That was in Lake Forest in Orange County. Now, I went back a year later. I didn't make another treatment after that. I went back a year later, just curious to see what it would look like. So, a year later, this was treated in 2012, and you can see the crabgrass pressure still remaining there, whereas in the treated area, we made a significant impact to the seed bank and affected it even the following year when there wasn't any herbicide treatment. The lesson learned here is you can see how herbicides can be a good long-term tool to help you get ahead of the game. Instead of trying to fight it year after year, really look at a program that will help you establish and start to control this over a long period. And recently, UC Riverside did their trial. They do, Aaliyah actually was very active in this over the years, being from UCR, but they did a crabgrass study post-emerge, and of all the post-emerge treatments that they tried, Dimension, which we commonly refer to as a pre-emerge product, was the most effective as a post-emerge. In fact, in their research, it showed their results. It showed crabgrass pressure was tremendous. Worst case scenario was the tillering, or is it in the worst case scenario, which was tillering stage. And Dimension provided the best crabgrass control in the study, and then secondly was MSMA, which is not even on the market anymore. So here's the actual data. You can see that percent crabgrass cover on September 7th was the lowest of all the other post-emerge treatments. So if you're looking at crabgrass as a problem, you can solve it pre-emerge, you can solve it post-emerge, but either way, Dimension's going to solve that problem. One other thing I would mention, as you get into the larger stages, you want to use a non-ion surfactant because that will actually help your control. And then finally, although we have seen it up to the 5-tiller crabgrass stage, the label will read it will control up to 4-tiller. Within Dow AgriSciences, we're very conservative. We had field scientists saying, let's just put 3 tillers on there. And we had field scientists saying, let's do 5 tillers. There was an arm wrestling match, and we all settled on 4 tillers on the label. All right. So now, one other thing that you might want to consider for post-emerge is if you have kikuyu grass problems or Bermuda grass problems, or even just broadleaf weeds in your tall fescue or ryegrass, for instance, which those are the turfgrass species that are going to be more going to start thriving this fall. In your cool season grasses, Turflawn is a very effective product there. You can use it to control oxalis, black medic, dandelion, thistles, plantain. Like I said, control Bermuda grass, kikuyu grass in those cool seasons. This is a trial that Jess did in San Diego County, I think it was, right? So this was on clover, on ryegrass, and you can see the progression of time, how effective it was to control clover problems in ryegrass, where this is the treated section, and adjacent to it was the untreated. So broadleaf weeds, Turflawn's going to be very effective on, or if you have a cool season grass and you want to get rid of a warm season like kikuyu grass, or even Bermuda grass. This is a trial that Mark Mahady did. He's a third-party consultant. He's very engaged with the golf community. He put this over perennial ryegrass, and you can see all of kikuyu grass that's dying out. Now, the magic bullet on this was you had to do 3 times every 21 days, and you got about 98.6% control, okay, over that period of time. So if you have that problem in your tall fescue, perennial rye, Turflawn is a way to take out your kikuyu grass or your Bermuda grass. And so this is just kind of the tillers themselves as an example. One final thing I wanted to mention as far as post-emerge, for those of you especially that are dealing with more industrial settings, or you're dealing with woody brush plants that are coming up in your landscape, Pathfinder is a really good product to consider. It'll take care of those fan palms, like I said, castor bean, tree of heaven, tree tobacco, and many other plants. You don't have to mix it. You just pour it into a hand sprayer or a service container of some sort, and use a squirt bottle to put it right there on that plant. So no, you don't have to worry about mixing. So here's an example of its efficacy. This is actually was in my backyard, Pathfinder, and this was used on a fan palm, which is about this tall. 25 days later, after a few squirts in the growing point, and this is what we saw. So we know it's very, very effective. Last year, the customer called me and said, hey, what do we do about this fan palm? It's growing between this wall and this wall, and we got all kinds of stuff in there. I can't get a chainsaw, and I can't pull this out. I can cut the palm fronds, but it's going to keep coming back. What do we do? So we tried it on that large palm tree, and 34 days after application, you can see that. Yes?
You spray just the growing point, not the whole leaves?
Correct. Yeah, the question was, where did I spray it? Did I spray it on the palm fronds? No. Don't worry about the palm fronds at all. Just a simple few squirts right in there,
Size scale?
and that's all it takes.
5 squirts?
You know, this one, the way I measure this is Gil's accurate measure of Pathfinder, is when you're squirting that into that growing point and you start to hear it puddle, that's it. And you'll hear it, because you'll hear the liquid start to shoot back at you a little bit. And then once you do that, that's all you need. It doesn't take very much. It's very, very effective. So I know that fan palm is a problem. You'll see it on a power line. You'll see it along these walls. Anywhere the birds will spread it. And glyphosate's been used, it comes back. People try to cut it, it comes back. It's really, I don't know if you tried, but even if it's this tall and you try to pull the ground, it's really difficult.
This is a test.
So-
Thank you.
So this is a really good way. And now, to be honest with you, the one that you saw next to my lawnmower, I killed that, and whereas I had my brother try to dig a few out, this one, I rocked back and forth and actually yanked out of the ground. Once the roots started to contract and die off, it was very simple to remove. So even small plants are difficult if you let them live, but by killing it first makes it very, very easy. Any questions at all on that?
Bill?
Yes?
Pathfinder or poison oak?
Oh, yes. Pathfinder and poison oak is actually very, very effective.
Anything with Pathfinder already pre-made?
Yes, Pathfinder is pre-mix. No need to mix it with anything else. Yes, sir.
How much? You know what Pathfinder is?
I'm going to have to refer you to Eddie on that one. Yeah, on the price. Any other questions?
It's not, it isn't expensive, because ours is already ready to use, and it's just a little small bottle like that,
Yeah.
so it's not, it's cost effective. And a bottle lasts a while.
Yes.
How long is the chemical good? If you have a jug of Pathfinder, you know, you've opened it up in the past, and how long is that chemical good for?
That's a very good question. I guess, shelf life of a chemical. You generally want to store your pesticides outside, or not outside, in a closed container. You don't want to expose it to sunlight. That's one thing. You don't want to introduce, say, water to it, so keep the moisture out of it. In general, for something like Pathfinder and many other herbicides, we're looking at 6, 8 years, something around there as far as longevity or shelf life. Any other questions? All right. These are just some fundamentals I'd like to share with you as far as improving your overall control. Hand weeding, of course, you can do. Cultivation is also, that's like using a hoe, but you keep in mind, it is very effective, but can be very costly because it can be take you a lot of time. No residual control. When you disturb that soil, you're actually bringing up new weed seeds. It doesn't affect the small emerging weeds. So what you see today, there may be very small ones that are coming up that you don't pick up, especially under the canopy. So even though you're doing these types of things, you do just want to be aware of some of the limitations. Now that you've hand weeded, you still have to get rid of that biomass. So that's certainly something you need to consider as you're using these particular pest management approaches. So, but can be very helpful. It's important to consider your texture of your mulch. If you have mulch that's approximately 2 inches in its size, if it's very fine, you want to put that mulch down about at least a 2-inch thickness. If you have very coarse mulch, okay, like in this particular case here, you'll probably want to go about 4 inches thick. The overall objective of mulch is to exclude light. So again, if it's really coarse and you've got it thin, light can still penetrate because those parts and pieces don't match up very well. But if it's, if it's finer mulch, then you could actually have your layer a little bit thinner. Yes, Marco?
How important is it to have it certified?
That's a good question. Importance of mulch being certified weed-free. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it's important. It all depends on your budget and your on whether you can do that. Because I think certified mulch is a little bit more expensive, right? But it can pay for itself in preventing the weeds from growing. Because even though you're putting mulch down to prevent weeds, weeds can still grow on mulch. These are some of the issues with it. Perennials can grow through, like this morning glory. Groundsel can grow because it's windborne, and the seeds can lay on top and actually germinate. In fact, this is kind of like a mulch medium. This is a nursery pot, and it's basically wood, chips, sand, and a little bit of soil to create a nursery pot. And groundsel grows very well sitting on top of that medium. Mulch is greater than 4 inches, but it may injure the plant, so you don't want to create this volcano, right? Because what happens, you actually exclude oxygen from that plant, and you damage the plant itself. So you want to be careful on that. Too fine, you germinate weeds, becomes a growing medium, just like a nursery pot. And if you need to hand weed, really need to use a pre-emerge also, possibly as a spot treatment in those areas. Because when you hand weed, again, you're bringing up untreated soil and seeds. And yes, Eddie does work. He's outside the room right now, but he is out there doing some demonstrations on calibration. Think about herbicides as your integrated pest management approach. Think about tank mix combination to increase your spectrum of control. You also want to check your label for plant tolerance, and we talked about the safety to the plants you're trying to grow. You also want to consider when you're developing a herbicide program, what are going to be your future seeding needs? Are you going to need to reseed, or are you going to need to repair areas that get damaged? And if your herbicide that you use has a residual that may extend a year or more and prevent seeds from growing. So you want to be sure that the herbicide you use does not prevent you from going back and making repairs because of that super long residual control.
On that note, for sport fields, our sport fields are typically reviewed for meter grass, but we do crop over, this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the timing of your pre-emergence with regards to cropping over a perennial rye?
So the timing of application for a pre-emerge application over perennial ryegrass.
We want to put down that perennial rye seed right about now, to help protect the base over the winter.
Right. Yeah, and Mike, the limitation to that answer is, as a pre-emerge, there's going to be limitations as to how quickly you can come back after either seeding or before seeding. So let's take it in an example that you had just said, where you've already planted or if you've already seeded your perennial ryegrass. Generally, I think most pre-emerge labels will say this: you want established plants before you make a herbicide application. Now we consider established grass, for instance, two mowings. So once the grass is grown, it's spread, you mow it, and it does the same thing, mow it twice, we'll consider that established turf grass. Then you can make a herbicide application. Now on the flip side, if you want to try to apply a herbicide before seeding, on dimension, you have to apply it 3 months before your planned seeding date. So you're going to have to do some back planning. So, it may be very it may limit you, now. There's probably not a solution for it as a pre-emerge if you're planning on seeding here in the future. You want to consider probably post-emerge treatments in that case. Okay. Very good question. And then finally, just know your soil types because your rates are going to be dependent upon that. Okay, and so we just talked about the timing of application and the importance of that. All right, so the next steps, I'm just going to share with you a couple things. These are some resources available to you. dowagro.com, you'll find a lot of this information we talked about. They'll have a weed identification guide. How many people here got a weed poster today? All right, cool. So the lucky ones got a weed poster, the early risers, right? You can also get a weed book at this website. So it's an actual book. I think it has, 75 weeds on there. You can get that and actually download it off that. There's rate conversions, labels, MSDSs, are all at dowagro.com. And then one other tip I'm going to share with you is, okay, so here's the weed book. This is an app that gives you weed identification. Go to Dow Turf and Ornamental on the App Store or Google Play. Now, once you download this app, Dow Turf and Ornamental, it'll ask you to put your email address and then a password. I'm going to give you guys a password. Anybody can guess? Dow Agro. So put in capital D, O-W-H-E-R-O, and you'll get weed identification. It'll give you some product information sheets. But mainly this is going to have, okay, so what is this weed? You can flip through your app, boom, grounds it. And on the back of that app, it'll give you pre-emerge, post-emerge options for you to consider. All right? But it's a really good turf and ornamental app. I really like it. Finally, the thing I'll have you consider is snapshot for this fall for your beds, and then possibly look at turf lawn for your turf grass, cool season turf grass, to control kikuyu grass or Bermuda or your broadleaf weeds. And then finally, in preparation for the pre-emerge season, your gallery and dimension as a tank main combination, both for turf and landscape plants. So with that, that's all I have. I greatly appreciate your support. Again, thanks to Eddie, Irrigator Tech, for this opportunity. And with Dow AgriSciences, if there's any way that we can help support you and solve your problems, that's why we're here and that's why we exist. Yes, Marco?
Yeah, one more question. Are you doing any case studies on any new products coming out for Dow?
The question is, do we have any new products? Yes, we do. We do have some new products. We have a product called Defender herbicide, which is labeled throughout the country except for our lovely California state. It's not labeled yet. I think they're telling us now 2016. It's a broadleaf herbicide on turf grass, and you'll use it at a similar timing that you do with Dimension as a tank mix to pick up broadleaf weeds early in the season along with the Dimension. Am I missing something else? I know we have an insecticide that's going to be coming out next year probably, and there's a couple other things in the pipeline that are super secret at this point. Any other questions? Again, if there's any opportunity that I can help solve your problems, please do call on me. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ed.
Good for you. Let's do a 5-minute or so. If you guys want to get up, use the bathroom, talk yourself on, text your girlfriend.